Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. The book I'm going to interpret for you today is called Save the Cat. However, this book isn't really about teaching you how to save cats or telling a story about saving cats. It's actually about the craft of screenwriting. The title, Save the Cat, refers to a screenplay writing technique. It suggests that when the main character is introduced, the screenwriter must make them do something that helps the audience establish an emotional connection with them. For example, if the audience sees the main character rescuing a cat from a tree, they are more likely to develop a fondness for that character. The author of this book, Blake Snyder, was a Hollywood screenwriter. He may not have been a household name, but he was quite successful in the field. Snyder sold many original scripts, often to major film studios, and some even to renowned directors like Spielberg. However, in recent years, he noticed that Hollywood was investing more money in star salaries, special effects, and marketing, while diminishing the importance of screenplay writing. For instance, he pointed out that the box office failure of Angelina Jolie's Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, was due to poor scriptwriting. The author emphasized that making the audience like a character goes beyond just having a sexy physique or a cool car. Instead of spending millions designing a new wardrobe for Jolie, it would have been more effective to create a scene similar to Save the Cat, when she first appeared, increasing her likability. The reason the author titled his guide to screenwriting, Save the Cat, is to underscore the importance of scriptwriting in a movie. Save the Cat represents the fundamental principles of storytelling that we are about to explore in this book, which are the timeless rules of scriptwriting learned by the author and his colleagues during their years in Hollywood. Now, you might be wondering, if we're not in the film industry, is it still necessary to learn scriptwriting? The answer is yes, it's very important. In everyday life, you might sometimes feel like you're making valid points, but others don't seem to listen. To achieve the most effective persuasion, you need to grasp the universal algorithms within the human mind, and that's storytelling. Humans possess a unique ability to relate their own fate to that of others, so when people listen to stories, they often unconsciously place themselves in the narrative, giving stories a magical persuasive power. The essence of scriptwriting is, in fact, telling stories to the audience. You are moved by certain movies because they touch your heart, and being moved essentially means that the story in the movie has convinced you. Now, let's follow Hollywood screenwriter Blake Snyder to learn how to create a compelling movie story. Before we begin, you can take a moment to think about your favorite movie from recent years. Got it? Let's start. Let's assume a scenario. One evening, you're out with friends to watch a movie, and you want to persuade them to watch your favorite one. Your friend will inevitably ask, "What's it about?" If your answer takes longer than 30 seconds, your friend might lose interest and start looking at other movie options, thinking, "Are there other movies we can watch?" This is precisely what all screenwriters dread. To avoid this situation, how do Hollywood screenwriters respond to the question of what their story is about? First, there's the one-sentence rule. You must be able to explain what your story is about in one sentence. This isn't just for recommending movies to friends, it's a vital survival skill for screenwriters. In Hollywood, producers listen to hundreds of pitches daily, and the time given to a screenwriter may be just a few seconds in an elevator. So, screenwriters must learn to concisely convey who the main character is and what happens to them in one sentence. If you observe real-life hit movies, you'll find that they can often be condensed into a one-sentence story. For example, a goalkeeper with poor skills gets fired from the team but suddenly learns he's set to inherit a massive fortune. Or a street thug who dreams of joining the mob discovers he's a martial arts prodigy. Or a poor young man falls in love with a wealthy girl on a ship, and the ship later hits an iceberg. You can probably guess these are Tomato Red, Kung Fu, and the iconic Titanic, all of which were hugely popular upon release. The author observed that many screenwriters tend to consider the one-sentence summary only after they've developed scenes and details. They immerse themselves in the scenes they're writing, forgetting a simple truth. If you can't express the core of your story in one sentence, you haven't truly grasped it. The one-sentence story of a movie is like its cover. A good cover makes you want to open the book and see what's inside. So, what makes a good one-sentence story? They all have one common element, irony. Irony requires contrast, and if this contrast is strong enough, it creates dramatic tension and a natural sense of irony. The goalkeeper goes from rags to riches, the thug discovers martial arts talent, and the lovers are torn apart. All these stories have strong contrasts. It's like adding a pinch of curiosity to the audience's minds, compelling them to explore the story. In summary, the author believes that if you want to create a great story, you should start by expressing the essence of that story in one sentence and examine if it contains irony. If there is no irony, perhaps this story isn't as captivating as you imagine. Alright, let's say you've crafted a one-sentence story that includes irony. Can you start writing the screenplay now? Not quite, according to the author. You still need to determine if your one-sentence story can genuinely pique the audience's interest. Without confirming this, starting to write the script and then making revisions later can be extremely difficult, even requiring a complete rewrite. So, what should you do? The method is market research. You need to step out of your comfort zone and discuss your story or creative idea one-on-one with others. Keep in mind that the essence of market research is to test whether your one-sentence story can engage strangers, not just friends and family. After all, there are many more strangers among the movie-going audience. The author suggests that when he needs to pitch to a film company or can't decide which of his 4 or 5 ideas is the best, he gets up from his computer and talks to random people. For instance, while waiting in line at Starbucks, he might turn to the person behind him and say, "Hey, can you do me a favor?" The person might give him a wary look and reply, "What favor?" "I'm about to buy my coffee and leave." Interestingly, these time-pressed individuals are often the best candidates. If you can capture their attention and make them want to hear more after hearing your one-sentence story, then your idea is a success. During storytelling, you need to watch the other person's eyes. If they start to lose interest or their gaze wanders, it's a sign that the story isn't working. There must be some overlooked issues, such as pacing being too loose, the narrative being too complex, or certain elements causing confusion, and so on. Sometimes, a story that you think is meaningful might not interest others, especially strangers. For example, a personal experience from a summer camp that holds deep meaning for you may not be of interest to others when you tell them about it. This is where market research is essential. It helps you step out of your subjective perspective and discover issues through genuine, objective feedback. So, as we mentioned earlier, to create a great story, you must first answer what it's about in one sentence. This sentence should contain irony and withstand the test of market research. Once you've accomplished these steps, can you finally start writing? Not quite, the author reminds us. Before you begin writing, besides answering the "what's it about" question, you also need to consider another question: what's it most like? Many people might initially feel resistant to this question, thinking their creative work is entirely new and unlike anything seen before. However, the author points out a fact: no matter how unique you believe your idea is, in the vast sea of stories, you can always find one or many works that are similar to your concept. More precisely, your story inevitably falls into a certain genre or type. Those stories that appear unique often introduce twists to a specific type of story. But fundamentally, they still adhere to the basic principles of that story type. Therefore, to be truly unique and break the mold, you must first understand the mold, which means understanding which type your story belongs to and its fundamental principles. The author mentions 10 story types in the book, and he believes that every film in history can be categorized into one of these 10 types. Now, let's delve into 3 of the more classic ones while comparing them with your favorite movies in your mind. The first type is the ordeal. In one sentence, this type can be summarized as an ordinary person finding themselves in an extraordinary predicament. For example, an average guy discovers that terrorists have taken over the building where his wife works, or his Jewish friend is about to be killed by the Nazis. Or maybe he's on a cruise ship that collides with an iceberg and is about to sink, and so on. Since most viewers are ordinary people, seeing a protagonist facing these extraordinary challenges often leads to empathy and captures their interest. The appeal of these ordeal stories depends on the strength of the contrast between the predicament and the protagonist. The greater the gap, the more compelling the story. This is easy to understand. Would you rather watch a strongman take on the police or a scrawny geek outsmart the Hulk? Most people would choose the latter. Furthermore, the author points out an essential rule for ordeal-type stories: the predicament faced by the protagonist should ideally tap into the audience's most primal emotional resonances, such as the desire for survival, fear of death, greed for wealth, the instinct to protect loved ones, and so on. For example, In Die Hard, the male protagonist, who just wants to visit his wife, finds her workplace occupied by terrorists. He's just an ordinary cop with no extraordinary skills or powers, but he ultimately defeats the terrorists not just through physical and mental abilities but also through a universally relatable belief: I have to save my wife. Alright, having covered the first story type, the ordeal, let's take a look at the second type, the wish fulfillment. Just hearing the name, you might immediately conjure up an image. You find a bottle on the street, and a genie pops out, saying, "Master, let me grant your wishes." That pretty much sums up the essence of these stories. The protagonists in these stories are often initially oppressed or mistreated by others, making us wish that someone or something could bring them a bit of happiness. Then, due to some divine power, luck, or magic, the protagonist suddenly has a wish granted or gains a significant ability, resulting in a dramatic change in their life. Many classic movies fall into this category. For instance, an ordinary person suddenly acquires godlike powers, or they stumble upon a mask that lets them change their appearance at will, or they obtain a potion that makes anyone instantly fall in love with them, and so on. However, an important, and inherently human, rule for these stories is that audiences don't want to see anyone, even the most downtrodden character, win continuously, because deep down, we all know that such events never happen in real life. So, the conclusion of the story should teach the protagonist a lesson or make them realize that magic isn't everything, and being an ordinary person, just like the audience, is the best. Now, let's discuss the third type of story, the quest for identity. In this type of story, the protagonist embarks on a journey to find something, but by the end of the journey, they discover something else, themselves. This might sound a bit abstract, so let's break it down. Firstly, in the beginning of these stories, the protagonist always has a specific goal in mind, which we refer to as the Golden Fleece. For example, in the fantasy world of the Illuminati of the Greenleaf Immortal Sect, the protagonist's goal is to find a way back home. In The Lord of the Rings, the protagonist aims to reach Mount Doom and destroy the One Ring. There are also many treasure-hunting stories where the goal is to find a hidden treasure, or adventure stories where the protagonist initially seeks to participate in a distant competition or uncover the truth about certain events, and so on. Moving on to the middle part of these, quest for identity, stories, the key lies in the people and events the protagonist encounters along their journey. These individuals and events become milestones in the protagonist's growth, influencing their character at every turn. As the story reaches its conclusion, the protagonist gradually comes to understand their true pursuit or uncovers certain life truths, while the initial quest for the Golden Fleece takes a backseat. Self-discovery becomes paramount. If this still seems a bit unclear, let's look at a specific example. In the movie A Chinese Odyssey, the protagonist, Wukong, begins as a mountain bandit leader content with his life. One day, a woman named Spring 30th appears on his mountain and claims it as her own. Wukong vows to drive her away and retake his mountain, that's his Golden Fleece. Now, let's see what Wukong experiences on his journey to obtain the Golden Fleece. First, in his battle against Spring 30th, he meets and falls in love with Bai Jingjing. Later, someone tells him that Spring 30th is a spider demon, Bai Jingjing is a white-bone demon, and she's actually the reincarnation of Sun Wukong. Of course, he doesn't believe this at first. As Wukong continues to struggle against Spring 30th while developing a complex relationship with Bai Jingjing, she tragically dies for certain reasons. To save his beloved, Wukong uses a time-traveling device and goes back 500 years, where he encounters the fairy Zixia. In a series of subsequent events, he gradually falls in love with Zixia in this new time frame and discovers that he is, indeed, the reincarnation of Sun Wukong. Notice that by this point, Wukong has gone through a series of trials, with each setback representing a growth milestone. Along this journey, he strays further from his initial goal but gets closer to understanding his true self. Now, the story reaches its climax. Zixia is captured by the Bull Demon King, and to rescue her, Wukong once again dons the Inhibition Crown, transforming back into the Great Sage, equal of heaven. After everything is resolved, the initial Golden Fleece, Spring 30th, has long disappeared. Still, through this challenging journey, Wukong undergoes a process of self-discovery, finding his true identity. A good quest for identity story isn't about the distance of the journey, it's about the changes the protagonist undergoes along the way. Each story of this type fundamentally revolves around personal growth and self-discovery. So, we've covered the two questions you need to answer before you start writing your script: what's it about, and what's it most like? Once you have the answers to these two questions, you can start your script writing. Here are 3 handy tips to get you started. First, the tip about character design, which is what we mentioned earlier as saving the cat. Remember, the idea is that the protagonist should do something likable when introduced, such as saving a cat, to make the audience root for them. At first glance, this technique might seem cliché, and you might wonder if all protagonists have to start by rescuing animals or helping beggars or elderly people cross the road. Of course not, it's not that simple. The use of this tip requires subtlety. For example, in the movie Pulp Fiction, you'll see 2 hitmen with rather unlikable appearances and professions. One of them is the protagonist. But in the next scene, you'll witness them having a serious discussion about what a Big Mac is called in France. The entire conversation is both humorous and childlike. But why did the director include this seemingly unrelated dialogue? This is where the saving the cat technique comes into play. You see, these 2 hitmen are about to do some not-so-nice things. But since they are the film's protagonists, they must be made likable to the audience. So, the director shows the audience a slightly endearing and goofy side of the hitmen right at the beginning, rather than portraying them as soulless villains. So, saving the cat is just a placeholder term. Skilled screenwriters will find various subtle ways to make the audience like and support the protagonist. That's the essence of saving the cat. Now, what if you want your protagonist to be unlikable or flawed from the start? There's another form of saving the cat for that situation: make their enemies even more terrifying. Let's return to Pulp Fiction for an example. Clearly, the director worried that showing the hitmen as slightly childish wasn't enough to make the audience like them. Therefore, a bit later in the film, just before the hitmen reach their victim's residence, the director has them discuss how terrifying their boss is. They tell a story about another colleague who got thrown out of a window while giving their boss's wife a foot massage and died instantly. Similar setups occur later in the film. If the audience initially sees the protagonist as a bad person, comparing them to their boss will make them seem like a docile Barbie doll. This balance helps audiences unconsciously support the protagonist, achieving the saving the cat effect. Now, having covered character design and saving the cat, let's move on to a tip about presentation: show, don't tell. What does this mean? Let's explore it through a few scenarios. In the first scenario, the female lead tells the male lead, "You know, you're actually my brother. I didn't tell you earlier because our parents said if I did, they'd disinherit me." In the second scenario, the female lead says to the male lead, "Do you remember how wonderful it was when we first got married? But in recent years, I've felt you growing more distant. Even when we go out together, you seem absent." In the third scenario, the male lead tells his brother, "Things are different now. Back then, I was a star guard for the New York Giants. But in '08, I had that accident. You should remember, they stitched up my leg with over 20 stitches. I almost became disabled. If you've managed to endure until this point without hitting the rewind button or closing this audio, I must thank you for your patience. But I believe you must have felt uneasy and uncomfortable during this listening experience." The author points out that the reason for this discomfort is that, for the sake of convenience, the screenwriter has characters directly explain the story's background and plot to the audience. Consequently, the characters' words are not what real people would say in those situations, they're the words the screenwriter wants the audience to hear. This makes the dialogue feel forced and dragging, causing discomfort. Movies tell stories through visuals. Just like in real life, we understand someone mainly by what they do, not what they say. Therefore, the author emphasizes that if you can convey the plot directly through visuals, avoid using dialogue to tell the audience. Excellent visuals can communicate far more than words, subtly chiseling into the audience's minds, whereas narrated plots are like throwing a sledgehammer at the audience, overly and unnecessarily explicit. Next, let's talk about the third tip from the book, which is about plot design, called twists, twists, twists. This tip emphasizes that a plot should not merely move forward in a straight line, it should continually change direction and intensity, building towards climaxes through successive twists and turns. While this might sound simple, it's incredibly vital. Imagine storytelling as a race with your audience. Once the audience predicts what's coming next, they essentially outpace you, and your story loses its grip on them, leading to failure. So, how can you avoid this situation? The answer lies in plot twists. Let's go back to the movie, A Chinese Odyssey, as an example. When the Monkey King's mountain is taken over by the spider demoness, that's the first twist. Falling in love with White Bone's spirit while battling the spider demoness is another twist. Then White Bone's spirit dies, and he falls in love with the celestial maiden. But she gets captured. In this film, every step forward in the plot involves a twist, breaking the audience's expectations and accelerating the story's development. Zooming out to look at many movies, you'll realize that most movie stories fundamentally revolve around a major twist. The protagonist starts at the beginning, undergoes development, and arrives at the end, with noticeable changes occurring along the way. This is the essence of character arc, which is essential in scriptwriting because it imparts value to a story. When your story has a valuable message to convey, it needs to demonstrate its impact on people, including the characters and the audience. In some sense, movies are all about change. The measure of success is often determined by who is willing to change. In stories, the good guys are typically those willing to embrace change and see it as a positive force, while the villains are those who resist change and ultimately suffer the consequences. Movies remind us that to succeed in life, we need to constantly evolve and change. This fundamental idea not only applies to storytelling but is also one of the most universally recognized beliefs in the world. To sum it up, in Saving the Cat, I've shared key insights. Scriptwriting at its core is about telling a story to the audience. To craft a great movie story, you first need to answer the question, what is it about? In that one-sentence answer, irony must be included, and it should withstand the scrutiny of market research. Then, you need to consider another question, what is it most like? This means identifying the genre or type your movie story falls into. During the writing process, be mindful not to violate the genre's fundamental principles. The author also provides some plug-and-play tips for specific aspects of storytelling. We focused on 3, Saving the Cat, show, don't tell, and twists, twists, twists. In closing, many of the techniques related to scriptwriting can be applied to everyday scenarios such as persuasion or expression. For instance, even if your proposal is complex, try summarizing its core features in a simple sentence like a hook to capture your audience's interest. Another example is in job interviews or self-presentation, where you can turn your experiences into stories, showcasing key moments of overcoming challenges or personal transformation. Furthermore, in public speaking or communication, employing twists can make your audience question things they've always believed to be true, capturing their attention. These examples illustrate how the art of storytelling, which is fundamentally about conveying information in the most engaging way possible, can be applied across various professions and life stages. That concludes the essence of this book. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share with your family and friends. Wisdom deserves to be spread, paving the way for a brighter future. Thank you, and goodbye.